With me now, former Trump White House Press Secretary Stephanie Grisham and former Assistant Special Watergate Prosecutor Nick Ackerman. Nick, in criminal law, you have aggravating circumstances, factors that increase the severity of the crime. Is that how the Department of Justice will view any national security fallout in this case? Will prosecutors be closely watching the damage assessment from the DNI, do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's a big issue here. In fact, I think the prosecutors will be investigating some of the same things. I mean, for example, they're looking at the videos that were on the storage area. They're going to want to see who moved things in and out, when they did it in relation to requests that they made. I'm sure they're going to be fingerprinting every one of those documents to try and determine whether anybody else had access to them and who had access to them. So in some ways, these two investigations are going to dovetail. But keep in mind, the grand jury investigation is covered by secrecy under what's known as Rule 6E. So for anything to be provided from the grand jury, from testimony that's provided in the grand jury, they're going to have to get a special order from a court in order to provide that information to the Intelligence Committee.
And Stephanie, as I was reading through some of this redacted material yesterday, I was remembering what you said a week ago, that Mar-a-Lago is not exactly the kind of place where you store classified top secret documents. You know, it's not hard to imagine that after this assessment, Trump's allies in Congress will come out and try to downplay the national security implications here, and try to discredit what the head of the intelligence community says. But I mean, talk about that. I mean, it seems pretty clear that the DNI is essentially agreeing with what you were saying a week ago.
Yeah, that's right, Jim. You know, it is the president's home 6 months out of the year, but it is also a club, a resort. And it is a resort that puts its members very first. And as I've talked about before, you know, the guests of the members can come in with very, very little vetting. They cater to their members, which they have the right to do. But there are people in and out of there constantly who are not necessarily vetted. So that's something to think about. And, you know, I know there was a padlock put on the door, but how easy could it be to cut a padlock? It seems like them. I think that's what's, you know, everybody wants to know, how does this affect me? Bottom line. And I've been really disappointed to see a lot of my Republican colleagues already downplaying it, saying, oh, they only found documents. I'm not sure what they were expecting. But right now, at this very second, there are people in our country and around this world who are protecting us. They are undercover and they're protecting us, whether they're working for an intelligence agency or the military. They are in dangerous situations all of the time, protecting us from things that we have no idea about. And the fact that there were documents there that could blow these people's cover, it should worry people because it puts your families at risk. And so I think that's something for people to really try to understand. It's not just some documents that were thrown in a box. These are people's lives, and these are the lives of people's families.
Right. And Nick, looking at this from a prosecutor's perspective, what stands out to you in the affidavit in the case that the Department of Justice seems to be building right now?
Well, I think what really stands out to me is the obstruction piece of this. I mean, the concealment that's listed in that affidavit. I mean, that is what really triggered this search warrant in the first place, because they had evidence that they were being lied to, that they were being played, and that Donald Trump and some others were basically concealing these documents, which leads to the big question, why would they even want these documents in the first place? Which, of course, brings up this issue of what happened to these documents, who had access to them, and were any of our real major secrets blown because of the way this material was handled. I think from a prosecutor's standpoint, it's that obstruction piece that really is important here.
And Stephanie, we've seen a number of responses from Trump revealing some of his thinking over the past several days. And some of these truth posts, as they're called, in an Orwellian sort of way, I guess, I mean, they reveal what appears to be a good deal of concern on his part. Do you think Trump is freaking out over this?
I think he's got to be concerned. I don't know how he's not. I mean, the man is under investigation 6, 7, 8 ways, different investigations, and now, you know, people have gone into his home and removed actual evidence. I think the fact that he keeps changing his messaging, to me, as somebody who worked for him for so long, that is very telling. A lot of times with Donald Trump, he will go to a message and stick to it and double down, triple down, even if it's absolutely the wrong message. This time the message keeps changing, whether it's they planted evidence or they shouldn't have gone in, I had no notice, I wasn't even given a chance, or most recently it's been, you know, release everything, be transparent. And so they released this affidavit that's completely setting precedent that I'm not sure will be good in the future for future cases or the president or future presidents, excuse me. And now that's not enough either. What are these redactions, you know, covering up? And really, they just want to see what the redactions are because they want to see who's talking to them and they want to see exactly what the DOJ has so they can start crafting messages against it. All that to say, yes, I think he is nervous. This isn't like him to change his message so often. He's much better at PR than that. I know that sounds silly, but usually when he just triples down on anything, no matter how bonkers or false it is, he gets away with it.
Right, no, and he has been all over the place on this. And Nick, I mean, but he hasn't explained why he had the documents. And Nick, Trump's attorneys submitted a filing last night further explaining their request that an independent special master review these materials recovered by the FBI. Do you think the judge will actually do that? Why comply with that request?
There's no good reason to comply with that request. Basically, it's based on the predicate that the special master would review privileged documents. First of all, anything that is covered by executive privilege is not something that he can assert. He's lost that battle in the Supreme Court. He's been there, he's done it, and he's lost. The only other item that could possibly be privileged here is attorney-client privilege. And what he relies on in his papers, quite amazingly, are the situations where his two lawyers, Rudy Giuliani and Michael Cohen, had special masters appointed for them when there was searches of their home and office. The fact of the matter is, when you're dealing with a lawyer who has lots of clients and clearly attorney-client privileged information, that is a totally different situation. And what is really missing from these papers, it is so blatant and so glaring, is that there is not one iota of proof that there was anything in any of these boxes that was covered by an attorney-client privilege. The proper way to do this, if it really existed, was for Donald Trump to submit a declaration or an affidavit pointing out that there are certain communications in there that were between him and his attorneys. He's failed to do that. I mean, if I were the judge, I would just dismiss this out of hand.
And Stephanie, another thing that you know about when it comes to Donald Trump is how he likes to get to the bottom of leaks. And one of the things that I noticed in this affidavit that was released yesterday, even with all of those redactions, is that it mentions lots of witnesses who are integral to this investigation. I have to think that Trump is, going a little mad right now trying to figure out who these leakers are, who these witnesses might be.
I completely agree with you. I've said that definitely from the start. Something I found interesting about the affidavit mentioning witnesses. Before, I thought it was 1 or 2, and obviously 2 could be the witnesses, but I thought it was just somebody close to him, which I still believe it is because of some of the details that the FBI and the DOJ had when they went to Mar-a-Lago. But now a concern I have is, if there are more than one, if there are plural witnesses, he's got such a small group around him. I'm wondering if he has taken things out of those boxes and shown them around. And perhaps some of the people he has shown these things to have spoken up. That will be incredibly damning if that's the case. But the fact that there may be, more than one witness, more than 2 witnesses, makes me just wonder if it's a bigger circle, again, people he has shown things to, because his circle right now is maybe 10 people.
All right, Stephanie Grisham, Nick Ackerman, thank you very much. We appreciate it.